Just Energy Radio with your host, naturopath and medical intuitive, Dr. Rita Louise. We have learned from Einstein's theory that matter and energy are one. Physicists believe that all systems in nature have their own particular way of vibrating. From the swinging of a pendulum to the waves of the ocean to the light that brightens the sky each day, each of these oscillates at its own unique rate. The same holds true for every thought, feeling, event, or word we speak. Each has its own frequency or rate of vibration. What many of us don't realize is when we take everything in our universe down to its simplest form, it is all just energy. Join Dr. Rita Louise on a journey through time and space where past, present, and future collide. Today, what you believe may be called into question. What we want to know is, who made up the rules? Be brave and step outside the box. We are about to turn our world upside down and venture into the unknown. Hold on. We are departing our own beliefs and entering alternative realms. Enjoy the possibilities.
Hello, and welcome to Just Energy Radio. I'm your host, Dr. Rita Louise, and thank you all for tuning into the show today. Some really cool topics that we're going to be talking about. In the first hour, we're going to be speaking with Gian Quasar about strange sea mysteries, a new topic to the show. And in the second hour, we're going to be speaking with James O'Con about the lost technology of the Maya. But don't forget, Just Energy Radio is brought to you by SoulHealer.com, where you can find out about all the services I offer, including medical intuition evaluations, intuitive counseling, as well as energy medicine, energy healing sessions. All these are available from the comfort of your own home, so you don't need to be where I am to take part of these services. It's also brought to you by the Institute of Applied Energetics, where you, too, can learn to become a medical intuitive or energy medicine practitioner. This, too, is available, all distance learning. Just Energy Radio, if you're interested in signing up for our newsletter, please do go to the Just Energy Radio website. That's www.justenergyradio.com. And while you're there, do check out our over 5 years' worth of show archives. And just to, if you're a first-time listener, Just Energy Radio is also available on iTunes, as well as for the last, I'm going to say maybe 6 months or so, we've been putting up some live stream on YouTube so you can listen to the show like while you're in your car driving down the road. I think it's cool. Anyway, moving on, let me tell you a little bit about John and get him on the air. Gian Quasar is the first person to completely document the Bermuda Triangle incident by incident. His research began over 20 years ago, and he has compiled the largest private repository of reports and official maritime documents containing over 350 cases spanning over 2 centuries. Over 150 of these have been disappearances which have happened in the last 25 years. Quasar's tenacity in finding every scrap available has gained him popular recognition as Generation X's #1 investigator of the most famous phenomena topics. So please welcome to Just Energy Radio the author of the new book, Distant Horizons, Gian Quasar. Hey, John, how are you?
Good, how are you? Thank you for having me.
I'm looking forward to it. We've never, talked about sea mysteries or the Bermuda Triangle on the show, and so I think it'll be fun and very informative to get some insight from somebody that obviously has a passion for it and probably knows more than what they put on TV, which tends to be the same thing over and over and over again.
I don't know. I never watch myself on TV. I've never seen a single documentary that I've ever been on or contributed to. But I have a good idea that, sound bites really don't say it all.
That I believe. See, I have to watch when I'm on TV because I have to check to see, if I have good hair. And then I don't even want to, pay attention to what I'm doing, but I have this hair thing, so I don't know. Okay, sea mysteries. How did you become interested in events that occurred, on distant horizons?
It's a continuation of my Bermuda Triangle research, and it's separate mysteries around the world as well, so it's not just limited to one area. But I kind of got started by accident in 1990 when I started investigating the triangle on my own. I had watched the documentaries as a kid, the old ones in the 70s, the old Sunshik or Alan Landsberg. But I didn't start reading books until much later on it, and by this time in 1990, they had all dried up. So I think the last serious book was about 13 years old at that time. And so I was quite curious if this was a real phenomenon. It would still keep going on. And yet there was no documentation for 13, 14 years on any disappearances, so I started checking newspapers, and they don't really tell you much of anything. And so then I stumbled upon the NTSB, the National Transportation Safety Board, and I asked them to do a database search of all aircraft posted missing or not recovered for an X number of years, and I was shocked at what they pulled up. I actually asked for the earliest times they had documentation, which was 1960s, and I got probably 40 more disappearances of aircraft than the old books had ever reported at all. And so here suddenly with only one database readout, I had more incidents than all the authors who wrote all these bestsellers in the 1970s. And so I continued to ask for database scans, and so I got all the 1970s, the 1980s, and that's when I started adding dozens and dozens of new disappearances to the Triangles list and started getting accident reports. And it's really quite odd what the details are, and that's what got me hooked. I continued to do it. I had all my contacts by this time with many repositories around the world, and that's how I added so many disappearances. And during this time, of course, I would be investigating outside the Triangle, all these other, you'll come across all these other disappearances and mysteries, and so Distant Horizons is the product of all these extra mysteries, not just the Triangle.
When you talked about the 40 disappearances in the 60s, those were just aircraft disappearances. Did that include ships that have disappeared as well?
In that one database search, that was only aircraft. And you see the Triangle's reputation at that time, the Encyclopedia Britannica would tell you that the Bermuda Triangle's reputation was based upon about 50 ship disappearances and about 20 aircraft disappearances, which is basically what you would get from the books at that time. And the actual statistics are quite different. It shows, to this date now, hundreds of aircraft just from World War II, and boats are uncountable. Too many simply vanish and are not investigated. So you can average about 12 to 15 smaller pleasure boats per year. And this is only in the area of the Triangle.
And actually, let's get a little remedial, just in case there are people that are not really familiar with, what's going on in the Bermuda Triangle. Can you just kind of give us a little overview of, what the whole phenomena is?
Well, it's two things. One, it's a geographic area, and that would be in the general vicinity of between Bermuda, southern Florida, and Puerto Rico. Number two, it's really the enigma of the Triangle. In this area, more ships and aircraft disappear in fair weather than in any other place in the world. So it's the enigma that it's the number one area for nautical mysteries on Earth.
There have been comments about a similar kind of triangle over by Japan. Do you find the same kind of phenomena happening there, or do you think that they're just kind of trying to add to the mystery of what's going on in the Bermuda Triangle?
It's on the exact opposite side of the Triangle. So there have been magnetic anomalies, which is also the big symptom of the Triangle, unusual electromagnetic aberrations. But not as much disappears off Japan because there's simply not as much traffic. The Bahamas and the Caribbean invite so much more traffic that naturally it's going to be, mathematic probability tells us it's going to be much more. But similar phenomenon do occur, and actually larger ships have been known to vanish off of Japan than in the Triangle.
I just think that it's interesting that in recent years you don't hear about, current disappearances. What I know is from what I've watched on the TV shows and one book that I read many, many years ago. And, speaking about aircraft, there's the whole Flight 19, the military aircraft that just disappeared off of, they think the Bermuda Triangle. But after that, it really kind of dies. You don't hear about anything contemporary. Why is that?
They don't listen to me. They some of the documentaries. Well, I've done so many. I mean, there's over 30 one-hour-long shows that are based solely on my research that I've either had to be the consultant to or interviewed on. And I give them all these new disappearances. I have put the 1980 disappearance, which was UFO related. They have used that one. But when it comes time to put on really newer ones, considering the book stopped in the 1970s until mine, 1980 presented itself as a new disappearance. But the actual new ones in the past decade or 2 decades, I've been on TV for 12 years now, so they always want the classic ones that became classic because of all the popularity in the 1970s. It's terribly difficult to update them to new disappearances. Despite my book coming out or anything, they still stick with the 1970s. They're stuck in their own time warp.
And I find that interesting because with GPS and, our increased ability to communicate and cell phones and just our connection, in World War II, my mind is thinking they're doing Morse code, but I think that was probably a little bit earlier in time. But our ability to communicate has improved so much, and so if you have an aircraft or a big vessel disappearing, you would think that if they were having some kind of an accident or, they were in some really bad weather, that they would put out some kind of a mayday that, the tower or somebody would hear and respond to.
And that's been very rare. That was in the UFO case where the pilot was panicking. It's on my website so people can listen to it for themselves. An Iberia flight picked it up and then air to ground recorded it. But usually they just go out and they vanish. They can disappear while coming in for a landing. I've known a case where there were basically 2 eyewitnesses to a disappearance, and the aircraft simply vanished. And one was a tower controller who was watching it come in for a landing. Above and beyond this, I know of 120 craft at least which have carried an ELT, that would be in the aircraft, emergency locator transmitter. It's an automatic alarm which will jettison from the fuselage upon impact, and it will send an automatic electronic mayday which can be picked up by base stations, passing aircraft, and even traced by satellites. In military aircraft, this will be in the seat, and when they eject, this will then transmit. In no cases of 120 craft have any ever left this electronic signal indicating impact with the ocean. Ships will carry an EPIRB, emergency position indicating radio beacon. That's simply their version. When they sink, they should float free and start transmitting. In no case has an EPIRB signal ever been picked up indicating the ship sank. So it's beyond just a human error in trying to transmit a mayday, a verbal mayday. Even automatic alarms do not sound.
But it sounds like they're not having an emergency. They just literally
they simply vanish.
Disappear. Yeah. Which, because they keep trying to... Okay, on some of those shows, I'd like your opinion. They talk about the release of underwater gases that increase the waves in the ocean, and, it makes the density of the water less, and that's what makes the ship sink. What do you think of that theory?
Rubbish. I tell the producers that every time before they say, "What do you think of that?" I say, "Rubbish. It cannot affect aircraft." There was a oil rig that drilled into a methane bed, and it did sink, but there are helicopters circling all around, all these news helicopters taking pictures of it. And they're unaffected. Most of the methane beds are off the Carolinas, and that's not where the greatest amount of disappearances occur. And so methane would have to go through thousands of feet of sediment, thousands of feet of ocean and get a ship right at the right moment, and still it wouldn't affect aircraft. So it's a mathematical probability. If it's ever happened to a ship, it's happened maybe once. But they continue to drumbeat that theory.
But then again, if there was a boat, I mean, we'll just stay there for a second. If there was a boat that was being affected by the methane gas, they would send out a mayday, or there would be this beacon to identify where they are.
Unless it was so severe, they simply sink right to the bottom right away. The ELT would go with the EPIR would go with them.
I mean, on the more modern vehicles, do they have like GPS tracking? Like on aircraft, they have the towers, where they kind of keep track of where everybody is. And I mean, when they go into that area of ocean, do they still stay on radar, or are there areas where they, go off of this radar and then eventually you're picked up by another radar?
They will go off radar in some areas before they're picked up. They will go off Miami radar before they're picked up at Nassau. And not all radars are working at maximum range. Radar is more concerned in that area with all the little airports and islands with monitoring only approach and takeoff.
Okay. So there are radar dead zones.
Yes, unless they kick up high gear and start sweeping. But they really, that's after the fact. Same with radio control. It's still a very large area. We think the world has shrunk, but it's still very a large ocean. And what is mysterious is that, all these disappearances, most of them actually occur over the very shallow Grand Bahama Bank, and yet there's no visible wreckage. And with time, there is no undisclosed or unreconciled wreckage that is found. Wreckage over time on the shallow banks, even though the water is see-through, you can see the bottom. Wreckage after a while will attract the growth of turtle grass and make a little marled oasis, so you'll see this. And locals then spot that. And local divers will then go look to see what's there. And recently for Discovery, they were talking to so many divers, I told them, I'm not going to come up with anything, but they wanted to go dive at an unknown wreck. And all the divers they talked to said there are no unknown wrecks. We all know, we can all reconcile this ship or aircraft in the records with whatever. No one has been able to find any of the missing, even though many disappeared over this shallow underwater bank.
Wow, that's weird. Has any cruise liner, like a Carnival cruise liner, gone missing?
No, they have had power outages, and one lady on board told me that she even tried to use her cell phone at the time, and none of the cell phones would work.
That's kind of cool. Recently, someone asked me, and I saw this online, but I didn't really follow up that much, and so I'm going to ask you that there was recently found a crystal pyramid that was in the area of the Bermuda Triangle, in the water. Have you heard anything about that?
I heard someone make that claim, but that's been made for decades. I know stone pyramids have been reported. Dr. Zalitsky with National Geographic is looking into that, and there are some form of seashell pyramids off Florida from the ancient cultures, but I would be quite wary of someone claiming a crystal pyramid was found. I think they thought they found it at the center of the triangle exactly, so deep, miles down.
Yeah, when I heard it, I said, yeah, I remember seeing something about it, and when I looked at the article, it just had a artist rendering of the pyramid, which to me said, move along.
Well, that's where it came from. It's their own imagination.
Kind of in the same vein, there's also, there's the whole Edgar Cayce, that Atlantis sank
in
that area. What do you think of that and the findings at Bimini? Because isn't that also kind of in the Bermuda Triangle area?
Well, that's right, yes, in the hot spot. I devoted quite a bit to that in a chapter in my first book that McGraw-Hill published. That would be Into the Bermuda Triangle. And Cayce, why you have to discuss Cayce is One, of course, the geography of the area is a triangle, too. So when you write a book on the triangle, you have to discuss some of the enigmas that others have associated with the disappearances. Casey, in readings in the 1930s, had talked about Atlantis being this vast super civilization of prehistory that had all this electromagnetic energy by which it powered its ships and aircraft, that had aircraft and all kinds of stuff. And he said part of the last piece of Atlantis to sink was the Great Bahama Bank. And evidence for all these electromagnetic power sources would be found in 1933 near Bimini. And so then there was another reading of his in 1940 that said that Poseidia, which is the Bahama Bank, that's what he called it, would begin to rise again in 1968 or 1969. Now, those who believe in all of Casey's readings put those two readings together. And so in 1968, Labor Day 1968, when Dr. James Manson Valentine dived off Bimini and found the Bimini Road, they put it together as fulfillment, that this is something here will now point to the ancient civilization. This will give us the information on the electromagnetic energy that Atlantis used. And so you can't not avoid talking about Atlantis and Edgar Casey when discussing the triangle, because Bimini is actually quite at the center of a lot of disappearances and at an awful lot of electromagnetic anomalies. Dr. Zink, when investigating the site, noted that the compass would point in different directions at different times. And I've been told that by other divers in the area, that sometimes they just look at their compass and it's pointing in the wrong direction. So a lot of unusual electromagnetic anomalies occur in the area that are transient. They come and go. And here's Casey mentioning Bimini, and unexplained ruins would be found there in 1933. And then here are these Cyclopean ruins found in 1968 by Dr. Valentine, who was the first investigator of the Bermuda Triangle. So you can't avoid talking about all that. But are there ancient power sources down there zapping aircraft and ships, which the theory is extrapolated to say, and causing them to disappear? Well, that's kind of far-fetched. But those who adhere to it will suggest that that's a possibility.
Are there any theories out there currently, in your mind, seem like they might have merit?
Electromagnetism has to be involved in it, so I believe the electronic fog is at the center of it, and which is a phenomenon that does occur. It is disputed amongst meteorologists, but Bruce Gernon, a pilot who experienced it in the Triangle in 1970, is one who coined the term. And there is a University of Nebraska professor, David Paris, who is following through on this. There is a Russian physicist who's worked with Nobel Prize winners and so forth, who also specializes in ball lightning and aerosols, and he thinks it might be real. And so the meteorological phenomenon of electronic fog does exist. It will cling to an aircraft or a ship, and from the point of view of being inside this electronic fog, you will think you are flying through a fog bank. But you aren't. The fog is flying with you. It's only around your aircraft or ship. It is conducted only around there. And there have been witnesses to this and survivors. Charles Lindbergh apparently even encountered it, and he thought he was just flying in a fog bank, but he mentioned in his book Autobiography of Values how he was flying the St. Louis, Spirit of St. Louis, in 1928, I believe, leaving from Havana to Florida, and he encountered the gray mist, and all of his electronic equipment fritzed, and he found himself 300 miles off course when he finally came out of it. But he genuinely thought he was in a fog bank, but in describing it, he says he could look up and see it was clear. He tried to then increase his altitude to get above it, but he never could. And so that's a clear sign, it's an indicator that it was electronic fog, because Bruce Gernon said you can look straight up and see the sky. You can look straight down and see the sea. But there's fog all around you like you're in a donut. Martin Caden and those with him on his flight from Bermuda to Jacksonville in 1986 said the same thing. He called it electronic eggnog. It was kind of yellowish, and it completely conducted around their PBY Catalina, and everything, the Loran, all the navigation equipment, Fritz, but they still had power. They weren't, they had no readings, but they still had power. They could still fly, and they were locked in it for 4 hours.
Wow.
And so the electronic fog is quite real. What is generating it? Is there something under the ocean? Does it have to do with temperature changes? Is it that section of the planet that is something unique? Dr. Wilbert Smith was head of Project Magnet with Canada in the 1950s, and they did all these tests. And he found that in the tropic areas, such as where the triangle is, they discovered areas he called areas of reduced binding. They could be up to 1,000 feet diameter. And they showed electromagnetic and gravitational changes that are not considered expected. And so he called them areas of reduced binding because there was less attraction. And so today, those are probably going to be considered by your average physicist to have been areas of magnetic vortices that spin into existence due to rotational vagaries in the Earth and come up there before they dissipate for whatever reason. But what it has to do with the incline of the Earth and rotation, and can these or some other phenomenon inspire the electronic fog? And can that then do, if you can fritz all the electromagnetic energy, what can that do? Can that disintegrate an aircraft? Can that cause bending of space and time? Gurnon's encounter, he cannot account for 30 minutes, and he was advanced way beyond where he should have been when he came out of it. He was over Miami when he should have been over Bimini. And such time glitches are known in the triangle, and quite rational pilots with witnesses report having encountered them. They simply can't explain what happened.
This fog, does this occur in other places around the world, or is the phenomena primarily centered in the Bermuda Triangle area?
I've only heard it in the triangle.
Wow.
No place else.
This is fascinating stuff.
So at least some physicists are pursuing that this is a symptom. It's the triangle's most famous enigma, glowing fogs, electromagnetic aberrations, compasses spinning, all that kind of stuff. So it's being narrowed down, but is the electronic fog responsible, or is it a symptom of something else in the area that the electronic fog is only a symptom of? Because there are radio dead spots as well where the radio simply doesn't work. There's one south of Everglades City, I know that. There's a lot of oddities in the area, and it's hard to get people to understand that because the triangle has been so maligned by debunkers since the 1970s, because they come up with straw man arguments that you're talking about something supernatural or whatever. And I speak of nothing of the kind. I'm speaking of very tangible ships and aircraft with lots of people on board that exist in registers, and we know they are gone. They have vanished, and they have vanished in circumstances that are not normal accidents.
But I think getting the information out that there is stuff still going on, and it's a phenomena that we have a lot more data on, should spur researchers into taking a new and fresh look at it, in my humble opinion.
It has at least a few university professors are out there. They have my data as well. One is working with Gurnon. If I could finally get a TV crew to shell out the money, reality TV is so cheap. If I could finally get them to shell out the money to go to Russia, they could talk to the Russian physicist, who is probably might be the only man who has explained ball lightning sufficiently, and he's quite interested in this kind of stuff. Scientists always are, They, despite what some debunkers try and promote, scientists are the most curious people around. And if you have data, they will listen, no matter how strange it is.
Unless they've already made up their mind, which we see a lot of also. Let's shift gears. Because we only have finite time, and there were some other sea anomalies that I wanted to cover that you talk about in your book. And one of the things that I've heard something of are ghost ships. So are we talking about like ships that are haunted and there are like ghosts walking around on decks and it's scaring the passengers, or are we talking about something completely different?
By sea standards, a ghost ship is simply an abandoned ship. So it can be any number of reasons of why it's abandoned. But when you say a ghost ship, to any mariner, he'll simply assume that to be a derelict ship. And there's claims that there unusual things have happened, and that's why ships are found deserted. The Triangle, surprisingly, has turned out to be the center of derelict vessels in history and over the whole planet. I did not even know that when my first book finally went to press with McGraw-Hill in 2003. I had been investigating for 13 years then, but since that time, an old publication was discovered, and it's now been brought to the web, and that was Commander S.D. Sigsbee's report for the Hydrographic Office in 1894. For 7 years, they studied the pattern of derelict vessels. And so he even noted the curiosity that most of these vessels are located, and he gives the coordinates, and it's between Bermuda and the southeast coast of the United States, so it's areas of the Triangle. And so and we're talking about 1,628 derelicts for that 7-year period that he studied them. And
1,
most of these are in that area. And if that 7 years are typical of what's occurred before, you were talking tens of thousands of derelicts in the 19th century alone. And some of the crews, of course, were found from these vessels, but it doesn't change the curious statistic that it is here in the Triangle where most crews will lose their experience and their sense, and they will abandon a seaworthy vessel. And in many cases, the crews are never found again.
So the crews that have been found, were they alive, and could they recount what happened, or did they just find the remains of the people? They
encountered, they could speak about it. In his report, he does not go into even how many of the crews were recovered. We only have the breakup of derelicts by location and upright and sailing vessel type and so forth in their course, the day, and how long. Some drifted for years. Some would drift around in the currents around the Sargasso Sea. So they drift around in the Gulf Stream currents and simply orbit this huge sea in the middle of the ocean, which is at the center of the Triangle. And so I would guess, I'm still researching each individual case, but I would guess that probably a lot of these were picked up by other vessels. But that still leaves us with the conundrum, why did they leave a sound and stable ship, and why always in this section did crews lose their minds and their sense of safety and leave a safe ship for a small lifeboat in the vast ocean? We have some unusual reports, like from the British ship Mohican, which was off the Carolinas in 1902-04, and encountered what could be something like the electronic fog. It encountered that lenticular cloud that was flashing, and it seized the ship, and there was all this static problems. They couldn't lift the chains from the deck. And this was reported in the New York Times and the Philadelphia Inquirer when the ship docked. So for 30 minutes or so, I forget how long exactly, the ship was held like this, and there was all this electromagnetic phenomenon going on. Now, you can imagine that would scare some crews right off their ship.
Mm-hmm. Well, especially back then, when electricity wasn't a staple, and there wasn't an understanding of its effects like we have now. Have there been recent ghost ships found, or ships that have been just abandoned?
Yes, that goes on all the time. Usually it's smaller vessels now with maybe 2-3 people missing. There have been some unusual circumstances where individuals have vanished and their dog. That was a few years ago off Anclote Key that the woman aboard her small vessel disappeared, but the dog was sitting there just fine. That's happened before. There was the case of Bobby Powell, who was a Coast Guard petty officer who was off Andros Island, one of the big island in the Bahamas, where the water around it is just crystal clear, 7 feet deep in this case. And his line was strung out because he was fishing, and they found the boat, and it was simply anchored there, and his line strung out, and he was gone. A few disappeared from a sailing vessel in the Bahamas a couple years ago. The Hemingway was one that was derelict. Tropic Bird is one where the captain was a retired Navy captain, was sailing in the windwards, and he stopped making an annotation in his daily log. He had radar on board, so he probably came up. There might have been a radar blip, and he came up to see what it was, and never came back down. The log was never finished, and the Tropic Bird was later found beached in one of the Windward Islands. Another derelict was recently found in the Bahamas. I forget its name, but same thing, a single skipper aboard. 3 have disappeared off another ship, sports fishermen. Or one was found waterlogged, I know, off the Gulf area, and all the fishing poles were there, and everything, and the 4 guys were missing. And Hawarden Bridge was a freighter. In 1978, Hawarden Bridge was found derelict, and its 7-8 crew gone.
That is so weird. And it just seems to me that a percentage, I'm not saying everyone, but that a percentage, even if it's a small percentage, of the bodies would come on shore, that they would get bloated and they would start to float. I mean, I can understand that, fish and other animals in the water would eat them, but if they're close enough to the shore, you would think that some kind of remains would appear on a beach.
Never.
I have to tell you, I went to Bermuda once.
I know of no bodies or anything.
I went to Bermuda once a long, long time ago, and I was wrote a little will, did all this stuff, because I'm like, I don't want to go missing in that triangle. And I have to tell, this is for the listeners, if you happen to go to Bermuda and you're looking for a triangle keychain that says Bermuda on it, or a triangle anything that says Bermuda on it, I guess they don't think it's very funny because you can't find any. I was a little disappointed with that whole fact.
No, I guess they're afraid it's going to disturb business.
Well, yeah.
In Arabic countries, in India as well, in Muslim countries, the Bermuda Triangle is quite a big deal.
Really? Break it out.
It's they believe it has religious significance. One sect of Muslims, that their last imam will rise up, according to prophecy, from a throne on the Sapphire Sea, and they believe that's Bermuda. Well, there's YouTube videos of religious leaders teaching the significance of the Bermuda Triangle. I'm quite popular with them. They're always hitting like on my Facebook page, or I get messages. I have quite a lot of contact, because Muslims and Hindi, really, that's a big deal to them.
But that's kind of interesting. Let's say, that it is the home of Atlantis, the resting place of Atlantis, or where a place where the gods at one point in time lived. How's about that? We'll make it a little more generic. With the belief that they will come back, it's interesting that individuals in a Muslim country or a Hindi country would even reflect to something that was in the Americas. An association.
They do very much so. I think it's more popular amongst the Hindi because of their ancient writings like the Mahabharata and all that are very much epic in scale and speak of world clashes and wars in the past and in ancient civilization. And so I think they have a much more greater concept of an ancient world that was not primitive, whereas we in the West tend to think of everything as been a steady progress to the present time. That's not a very Indian attitude.
Mm-hmm.
And Muslims, because of the religious significance, I think, for certain sects of Muslims. It's quite popular in Indonesia as well. and the large Muslim population there.
So what kind of, I'm just curious, what kind of things, so it's a place where their God is going to reemerge or reappear in the current time?
No, the last imam, one of their great imams. So it has quite a lot of significance in that area that the last great religious leader is supposed to be revealed through that. So there's... You'd really have to look into it. I've tried to understand some of it, what they were telling me, but it's most of it on YouTube is going to be in Arabic, and so those that try and they're just quite short about that. This is very significant, and they want to know about it more. Oh, I get loads of interest from Arabia.
But what is
now in Indonesia? It's so popular.
But what is the tie to the Bermuda Triangle? Is it because of what they have learned of what is going on there with all the disappearances and the mystery, or is there some other connection to that location?
Probably some more like a portal type of concept, that this is a supernatural event or time and dimensions and all that, and so that this would have some significance. It's pointing to the area as some form of door or window, I suppose.
To the nether world kind of thing. I mean, when you just listen to what you say on the surface, it does kind of look that way, that people are going in there and the door opens and they go into it and don't come out.
Well, time warps and time bending space and time is popular in the West to discuss. So if you talk to a Muslim and try and get their interpretation of what could be causing it, it might be more along the ancient type of more supernatural ideas. Some Westerner will start talking about time warps and bending space and what could be going on. And so we're going to theorize differently. We're such a different culture from Arabia and India. I think you're going to have people saying the same things but applying, we're going to be more physical about it.
Right.
Whereas in India or Arabia, they're going to be more metaphysical.
Shifting gears here, of all of the mysteries associated with ships or disappearances, I'll make it kind of generic, which one do you find the most interesting or the most compelling in the general sense of the word?
Just an individual incident?
Yeah.
I would say Flight 19 is very complex because 5 aircraft vanished in unison, and so I wrote it. I think it's quite different from the Triangle, even though it gave the Triangle its reputation. The disappearance of 5 TVM Avengers out there in 1945 alerted the world press to the whole idea of disappearances in a particular area of ocean, and then this was followed within the next few years by some very spectacular airliner vanishing. So that's really what began the whole idea of the Bermuda Triangle before it even got its name. But I think Flight 19 is actually quite separate, and I pursued my investigations into that for my own book on the subject, They Flew into Oblivion. And there's some very hard things to explain about it, but I think ultimately why the flight vanished was a terrible military blunder, that there were some guys on the land that didn't know what they were doing and did not even know when that flight took off and when they should have really declared it an emergency. And I think possibly that flight could have been brought back had certain officers acted much more quickly and understood that that flight was in a far different position than they assumed. They assumed it was still close to the coast and had not been long in the air, when in fact when they reported their trouble, it had been in the air for an hour and a half and should have been near coming into shore on its homeward bound leg instead of simply taking off. And that was actually quite confused by the tower at Fort Lauderdale. There were a couple of key officers who looked at an errored reading that said this flight was supposed to be back at 5:23 p.m. And so when the problem was reported to them closer to 4 o'clock, they knew that this flight path they were on was only a 215-minute flight. And so they assumed the flight was simply still close to the shore, that it had only flown about one leg of its course. And that was not the case. This was a flight that was due back at 4:23, and it took off at 2:10. So they were actually 25 minutes or so from landing. It should have been 25 minutes from their landing. And so there's enormous confusion as to where that flight was, and it was simply much further out to sea. And had Fort Lauderdale realized that, had they not been looking at an errored ETA on the chit, I think they would have launched an aircraft immediately to establish clear communication and bring that flight in, but they didn't. They were very slow, thinking that this flight was merely at the Bimini Islands, 50 miles off the coast. It's quite convoluted. There's a lot that does not add up about how they could have possibly gotten lost out there with the sun low toward the west. But there's a lot of stuff that shows how human nature got involved with this.
Have they ever found any of the ships? I know that there are people that have looked for them, but have they ever been found? Or are they just part of the disappearance? Yeah.
No, Flight 19 was never found. I don't think it went down at sea. I think it went down in southern Georgia in a swamp, a federally controlled swamp, and that's why there's been no trace of it, because it's impossible to even go out there. This is 660 square miles of nothing but a peat bog that's it's a federal wildlife refuge, so even those who tend it don't even know what's out there, because it's impossible to go out there. And radar, there were 2 radar reports that were in the report, but they were dismissed because another officer there didn't seem to know what the fuel supply was. And but there were 3 radar reports which report 4 to 6 aircraft near the coast at Flagler Beach, Florida, and then Brunswick and Jacksonville later picked up 5 unidentified aircraft in their vicinity, and that's right by the swamp.
So the whole idea of them being over the Gulf of Mexico, not so much. No,
the lead pilot got really confused. And the whole idea, actually, technically, that they vanished in the Triangle would not be true either. They would have vanished over the Okefenokee Swamp in southern Georgia. That's where all my research led me. And I have to give reality TV credit for that they did pursue that quite seriously, and there's been a couple of good documentaries on that. NBC backed a 2-hour-long special in which they actually followed my manuscript. It was in manuscript form at the time of my book. And they even swung into correct orbit, into position, the highest declassified military satellite to try and take pictures, thermal pictures of parts of that swamp, to try and uncover any wreckage, because you can't get any closer than that.
Anything? Did they detect anything?
No, I could only give them certain sections. They couldn't afford to do the whole swamp. And they had the Indiana Jones of high tech, I forget his name now, look at it and try and interpret the readings, and they said there was nothing suspicious. And I gave them areas where there were known military wrecks from the war, from nearby bases, and they still didn't detect those, so I'm not really sure what they were using as their standard. That swamp is full of tannic acid because of the rotting leaves and timber, so it's going to eat through these wrecks. There won't be much left anymore, so I don't even know if they knew what to look for, what a wreck would look like after 50 years in that kind of acidic water. So maybe there's telltale evidence in all these readouts, but they didn't know how to read them, and they wouldn't let me see them.
Our government dollars are at work.
Actually, that's with NBC dollars.
Okay. Well, it's close. They have letters. We have about 10 minutes left, not quite. Let's touch on one more topic. So when I think of the high seas, I think of pirates, and their swashbuckling ways, or people think of Pirates of the Caribbean and Johnny Depp and the Black Pearl. Have you uncovered any good pirate stories or mysteries surrounding the pirate way?
Oh, they're all over. They've simply shifted from the Caribbean to Southeast Asia. The pirates of Malacca are quite famous. I think they've even dealt with terrorists and told the terrorists to shove off. But these are high-tech pirates. These are guys who they'll go after the big freighters and they'll get them. And they will find they have secret ports in Southeast Asia. They had ports in China where they would go. They would put their own spies on board these ships, engineers or whatever, and they would take over the ship at the right time. Or at Malacca, the Straits of Malacca, they would dart out in their own speedboats from all the mangrove swamps and lagoons, and they know to come right up behind these ships in the lee of the smokestack where the radar can't detect. And they'll get on there, they'll start shooting, they'll climb up, and they'll take over the bridge, and they will sail that ship wherever they want. And they'll throw the crew off, they'll make them walk the plank, essentially. They've killed entire crews. And then they sell the cargo, they transfer it to another ship and that they've stolen. And they're quite enterprising. They are doing big business. They're seagoing mafia. And I'm talking about, huge freighters. They don't go for little stuff. They take over huge freighters, huge oilers, tankers, cargo ships. They'll do whatever they want.
So like a boatload of Toyotas.
Yes, they'll steal it all. Sugar, they've taken silver ingots. They've taken $5 million worth of sugar in a freighter, and they either sink the freighter or it's found abandoned somewhere else, or they're found sailing thousands of miles away, and the Indian Coast Guard has actually chased them down, firing at them, and the pirates will shoot back, and you have broadsides going back and forth again. Instead of swords, they're wielding machetes and all sorts of stuff.
Well, and I think it's interesting because other than that one incident that happened fairly recently, you never hear about that at all.
Well, it got so bad in the late 1990s and early 21st century that navies were going out there trying to stop this. There was a whole bunch of stuff going on, and now you hear more about terrorists instead of the pirates. And Australia was afraid that that terrorists might put a dirty bomb off on Malacca, which is a very narrow passage, and you would halt half the world shipping because it goes through this narrow passage from the Indian Ocean into the Pacific, into Southeast Asia. And so it's an incredibly crucial waterway. And I think, their Arab terrorists were noted to be accompanying some of the pirates. Early after 9/11, reports were coming back that there were jihadists aboard this pirate cruise. And so there was reasons to be afraid that there was something else involved here. But that kind of stopped. I think the pirates got wind of it that these terrorists, aren't... Pirates are very earthy. I mean, they're into profit. So these terrorists, if they wanted to shut down their main source of piratical supply, I think the pirates finally told them to shove it. They were training terrorists for a while until probably they figured out that they were going to try and close down the passage, which would then completely cut off the pirates from their main source of piracy, and I think the pirates are a little more powerful in that area of the world.
Yeah, because the terrorists have a very different goal than the pirates would.
Yes, the terrorists were after terrorism, cutting off the main shipping supply around the world, and pirates want to leave that passage open so they can continue to creep up on the ships and pirate them, to take their cargoes and take the ships and profit by millions and millions of dollars every year. I forget what country now declared the Strait of Malacca a war zone in 2005, 2007, something like that. It was so bad that they declared it a war zone. And you have joint navies going out there patrolling it so that these large freighters can go through safely.
Wow. That's bizarre.
They're
need to send them all to that Dragon Triangle. Go to the Dragon Triangle. It's happening there. Looking at the clock. Any new projects coming up? I mean, I know this book, Distant Horizon, is pretty new. I'm not exactly sure, when it came out, but I know it's pretty new. But are you working on any new projects coming up in the future?
Scarlet Fiend is about to be released. That would be my expose on the Jack the Ripper murders. And I'm working on my book on the Mary Celeste and on the Zodiac Killer. 2 different subjects, quite different. And I have a couple of fiction novels I'm working on that I want to get out sometime. But the Zodiac, and my Bermuda Triangle too, that would be my sequel to my first one. I'm working on that. So I have quite a few books coming out. 3, 4 would be nonfiction, and I think I want to get a couple of stories out.
All right, so how do you move from nautical mysteries to serial killers?
Well, it's not really that different. I like to try and crack the puzzle, and I really only, in true crime, I really only specialize in the monomaniacs, those who were very clever and devoted all their mental energy to perfecting their crime, and they got away with it. There's like the Ripper, Zodiac. There's a couple of others, the EAR. He might still be alive, so don't have to mention him. And Boston Strangler, it appears DeSalvo may not have been it, and there was certainly someone else. Boston Strangler was actually extremely careful in what he did. And so it's trying to crack the puzzle and discover who really did these, looking at all the evidence.
Okay, I can see that. I find it interesting. This is one of my new things, is that there are a lot of people that put out a lot of information, but they really don't look at the evidence. And I appreciate the fact that you dig deep before you start putting stuff out there. So thank you for that part.
That's what I prefer. I don't chronicle events. Folklorists do that. I actually investigate these and can give conclusions, can put the evidence together, hopefully. But I do not simply chronicle all this contradictory data. I go for trying to solve the mystery.
Cool. And so if somebody wants to get a copy of Distant Horizons, and please do mention your other books as well, where would be the best place for them to go pick them up?
You can order them any bookstore. They're on Amazon, Barnes & Noble, online if you wish. That's usually easiest for most people. But it would be Into the Bermuda Triangle. Would be the first one. They Flew into Oblivion. That's Flight 19. Recasting Bigfoot is an expose on Bigfoot and Bigfootery. Soma is that's a novel. That's based on the search for the body of Alexander the Great, which might still exist in Alexandria, Egypt. Distant Horizons, and then very soon Jack the Ripper. That will be Scarlet Fiend. And those will be able to get online anywhere or order in a bookstore.
Excellent. I'm looking at the clock. We have 2 minutes. Any last words you would like to share with the listeners before we need to go?
Oh, dear.
Sorry, I didn't mean to put you on the spot, but I didn't want to open up a new topic of conversation.
No, not really. Just people have to keep an open mind. They have to investigate mysteries. Mysteries should never cause us to recoil. They're an invitation to come and look and see what's there, because they're telling us there's something to discover that we don't know yet. And that's how we progress, not by fancifying mysteries, but by investigating them, accepting that they still exist and that they must be explained.
Do you think the enigma that's going on in the Bermuda Triangle will ever be explained?
I think we will come closer to it, yes, if we probe into electronic fog and begin to realize the greater mysteries of this globe still, and how energy and mass interact, and how we have journeyed into the world of world travel, and still we don't know all that we're encountering. We only see the oceans and the sky, but there's invisible oceans out there still of energy, and all these mysteries may be pointing us to that.
Good. Well, I know the music's going to come up here in a second. John, thank you so much for coming on the show and sharing, your information about these nautical mysteries, and we'll have to have you back on.
Well, thank you very much for having me.
All right. Thanks a lot. That's Gian Quasar. His book, Distance Horizon. His webpage is www.bermuda-triangle.org. And we will be back with James O'Con after these words from our sponsors.
Just Energy Radio with your host, Dr. Rita Louise, will return right after these messages.